Good afternoon, everybody in attendance. Welcoming you all to this webinar titled On the Environmental, Health, Safety, and Financial Benefits of Optimized Indoor and Outdoor Airflow Management. The objective of the discussion this afternoon will be to talk through a couple different scenarios that are frameworks to offer a range of perspectives for the audience based on real-world applications for optimizing airflow management. I will be your moderator for the afternoon. My name is Jesse Shoemaker. My role is Vice President of Business Development with KMC Controls. On the call this afternoon with me this afternoon are Samantha Howell and Abigail Stoddart. Samantha, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Samantha Howell. I'm the Director of Sales at one of our EMCOR operating group companies here in Kansas City.
Hi, I'm Abigail Stoddart. I'm the Director of Corporate Real Estate for Corgan Associates. So even though we're an architect and design firm, I'm actually the occupier, and that's the role I play as the occupier end user, controlling all of our real estate and facilities.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. So we will roll directly into the first topic that we've prepared to discuss this afternoon, which we're calling the tenant transparency test. The concept being using ventilation as a competitive leasing metric. And we'll turn to Abby for this, but just to paint the picture, consider a high-rise office space that struggles to retain tenants who now demand proof of healthy, high-performance building systems post-pandemic. Abby, I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts.
Sure. Thank you, Jesse. I guess maybe some little background so you understand the mindset of the end user occupier. Space is only for our employees, and we look at it from the standpoint of we need to retain our existing employees, but as well as attract that talent out there that we're all competing so hard for. Depending upon your industry, it could be a little harder than others. So that talent, our current employees and future ones, all have these great expectations about the workplace. And one of those expectations is they want it to be as healthy and as sustainable as they're reading about in journals or as they're seeing on TikTok, as they're just imagining. And so that leads into my strategy of helping to provide that kind of workplace. So when I go out and lease buildings, I don't own, my portfolio is all lease space in multi-tenant high-rise. I put together my standard terms that I submit to a landlord. And listed out, I have a section that is quite detailed on what type of HVAC system do you have? Do you have a BMS? What is your BMS? Do you meter? How do you meter? Do you meter by floor? Do you meter by suite? What kind of information can I get from that metering? What is your air quality? Do you test it annually? How many air changes per hour in that suite or suites that I'm interested in? So all of these questions and even more about recycling and can we participate in that, and do you have composting, etc. I put in my standard terms that I send to the landlord and expect responses back. And so far, only a few have been able to answer just a few of those. But by doing that, I'm letting them know it's of interest to me. And I know that my peers are doing something similar to push that.
So if we could explore that just a little bit further, I know that you said that just a few of them respond back to you. I'm curious to know, what metrics do you find that tenants and employers gravitate toward most frequently?
It's definitely the building, if the building is fit well or well. I'm finding fit well gets a much more traction because it's a more accessible and understandable measure, and air quality. They want to understand and know that. Now, this is something, and I do know that I probably have a more educated population than some other companies, but they still don't understand like the mechanical engineering, fluid flow necessarily about it. So when I go in and say it's got a DOAS system for this building, I follow on by explaining, oh, by the way, it's bringing in fresh air as as its input, and so you're getting outside air in the building. So I have to explain, but air quality is definitely something that they worry about, and the air change per hour in that space.
Well, certainly, it stands to reason that measurement and validation of ventilation rates would have a pretty outsized impact into any type of indoor air quality metric, whether it's achieving Fitwell certification or just monitoring and dashboarding. Do you have any examples where you're specifically or you've seen any success stories around quantified airflow measurement for your tenant spaces, or just what impact quantified airflow measurement has had on Fitwell outcomes?
Actually, so far, no, because it still is new. The building owners and property management, they're just now really putting an effort into it. I'm fortunate that we are currently in one space that is pushing sustainability for a building to the actual, scary edge of it. As well as a new building that just did an entire renovation on its HVAC system. But so far, they haven't gotten to measuring that air quality or the airflow. Now, we have an internal team called ECHO that does that for me. I give them, the volume, not, the square footage, the clear height, and they can go through based upon what system is coming in. I get them access so we can take some airflow measurements, or sometimes the building has that, and we can sort of estimate that just on our own. And in a prior company, I would do that too, is just do an estimation of it. But that's, I think the property management and the building owner industry here in the US is just now getting more into sustainability and a healthier building. I see it starting on the coasts because we have a similar property in LA, and it will slowly make it to the middle of the country. I think part of what some of the folks on the call are probably dealing with is an older built environment, and then the expense around doing any kind of retrofit, or how do we modify that without busting the bank on our capital.
Naturally, and maybe that's a great opportunity to pivot to some of Samantha's experience, following on specifically from your comments there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't mention this earlier. We're EMCOR Group, we're a mechanical contractor. So we are oftentimes asked by building owners to help them either upgrade an existing legacy system, whether that be controls, HVAC, or any other auxiliary pieces of equipment involved in that. The challenge becomes retrofitting existing buildings with completely new mechanical systems is not easy, and most people cannot do it in one fell swoop. It's got to be phased, and it's got to be phased in sometimes over decades, right? You can take your oldest piece of equipment and start to phase them out over time, and then by the time you've phased out all of them, your first phase is due again. And the challenge with that is that we don't always have great measuring tools. But if you're going to go back to just some of the basic measuring tools, I mean, Abby, she wasn't very specific about what the building owners will be able to provide. But one of the easy things they can provide is just basic temperature and humidity settings, right? What is the humidity within your building? What's the temperature ranges that they're able to function in your hottest days and your coldest days? because a lot of times we know as buildings were built, they were built and intended for one use, and maybe they've transitioned to a different use. They have a different heat load, or as your mechanical system ages, it loses capacity, and it's maybe not able to cool your building as effectively when it's 110 degrees out. So I think those are some things that everybody should be able to provide to you, whether or not they have a super robust BMS system that can measure things like particulate matter and can measure things like CO2, or they can be, some BMSs can measure air turns per hour, and they can measure really, really intensive data on airflow per built or per office, right? So it goes from the very basics of just humidity and temperature all the way up to like advanced reporting through BMS systems. And every building's going to be different. Every environment's going to be different. It does make it a challenge. But I'm not surprised that, Abby, you're seeing some not being able to provide you that information, because it's
Right.
Realistically, we have legacy buildings with legacy mechanical systems, and how we retrofit them is not easy.
No, and it's expensive. Having had a portfolio where I owned a late 1980s building with original chillers and ducting, and the ducting was, a hamster habit trail as we changed and tore down walls and put up different walls. So it's so convoluted and it's expensive and confusing to manage. I feel for everybody out there on that, having done that. Um, what I think, if you are a property manager or building owner, is something to think about is, look at hopefully your tenants or potential tenants give you a standard terms list that you can respond to in the LOIs and then roll into the lease. But if they don't, just an easy thing to do is what you mentioned, Samantha, is temperature and humidity. And if you can provide them that on maybe a simple dashboard, even the most simple of BMSs should be able to provide a dashboard that you could even take a snapshot of once a month and show what the average was. That is probably more information than a lot of buildings are giving their tenants. Not like the new ones that have been repositioned and gutted with, tens of millions of investment, but just the old ones. If you can do that is some insight. And then it opens a conversation with the tenant on how they could use that to help support their employees. Because again, I go back to, I'm not here for the firm. I'm here for the employees to create that space and have a workplace for them, because they do have great expectations about what they want from the space.
I'd like to follow along that line of thought and come back to Samantha. I mean, given your variety of project experience, just, maybe are there any dashboarding elements, based on some of Abby's comments here, that have really stood out to you from projects that you've executed, whether it's, pertaining to a specific IAQ standard, or just, a proactive building owner that wanted to see some performance data that really led to some ideal outcomes?
Yeah, so it's a really, again, we're talking about a vast level and different legacies of buildings. And I think for people that are still in that transition from maybe an old pneumatic control system or standard, even just direct to a thermostat control system, the investment of automating, or at least being able to read your temperature settings from a web-based type program, it's invaluable when it comes to energy reporting, when it comes to comfort, when it comes to even just being able to check in and look at your building on the night where it's, negative 20 degrees, or in the afternoon when it's 110 degrees. Because, we all get those calls. The tenant says, hey, I'm hot, or hey, I'm cold. Well, you can remote in and you can say, hey, we're within zone of where we're supposed to be. And then you're not dispatching a building engineer or somebody to try to, fix a problem that doesn't exist, right? And so having just baseline reading set points, not even just the ability to control, right? The ability to read is very, very important, because it's going to save you not only in service type calls like, hey, this tenant says it's hot, I need to get somebody out there to go look, but it'll also give you baseline. And when we talk about data, the data baseline is what's so important here, because how do you get better from baseline if you don't have a baseline? And not having some kind of even programmable thermostat, or even, I mean, we work in a lot of legacy buildings, from the 70s and 80s that still have pneumatic controls, right? There's not much that you can do if you don't have a baseline on how you become more energy efficient, or how you go after energy efficiency type grants, or how you go after things that you might need some additional funding for. You got to have it. And if you don't have just the basics, you're really, at this point in time, you're kind of, working in, seems like in ancient times, right? You're strangled by not having access to the data.
Well, I think we can summarize this portion of the discussion by saying that, having some sort of an indoor air quality measurement approach in place, or at least having some sort of an indoor environmental quality approach in place that can be commonly shared to occupants and facility managers across the landscape of digital controlled systems or pneumatic systems, but pays dividends in client retention. So thanks again for your contributions here. I'd like to move on to the next topic, smarter buildings and smarter ventilation. So this is more about aligning an airflow strategy with ESG goals. And I'd like to turn to Samantha for this and offer the scenario of a commercial real estate investor that would like to report strong ESG metrics to stakeholders, but lacks visibility into actual building performance. So how could airflow monitoring or other key performance indicators align with sustainability reporting and ESG targets?
Well, to kind of go back, tie in my last comment, if you don't have data, you can't report it. Right. And so if you're moving into those worlds where you're wanting to report certain ESG standards or goals or metrics, you've got to have the data initially to be able to do that. And you can deem that data from older legacy type systems. It gets a lot more complicated. I personally struggle to do that sometimes, and I'm in this business all the time. I'm not going to lie, I will ask AI to pull statistics and to pull formulas and different things for me sometimes, because I'm not an engineer by trade, but it's a lot of math and it's really cumbersome and it's hard to do. I would say if you're in a building with legacy systems, find a partner or an engineer that can help you develop that baseline. And then once you've got the baseline, you can start attacking what are the most important parts of that ESG metric that you're trying to hit. And is it outdoor air? Is it air turns? Is it advanced filtration? Is it, better control of temperature? Like what metric of those gets you to your end goal? And then you can work backwards from there. But if you have a overall encompassing goal of these ESG standards, right, that you're trying to meet, but you don't know how to attack it, you really have to drill down and figure out what's best for your building. And for a lot of buildings, it is outside air. How much outside air are you bringing in? How much outside air do you need to bring in? And then how do you treat that air once it's coming in? How do you treat the return air once it's coming in? I mean, we haven't really touched on sick building syndrome yet, but it's part of, I think, a future conversation that we've got planned today. But when we talk about tenants and their desires for a healthy and a fit well, like Abby mentioned, fit well environment, sick building syndrome is something that we need to consider as building owners, because if we are not making sure that air quality that is either being introduced to the building or exhausted is not meeting those standards, I mean, you can wipe out a whole floor of people with some kind of infectious disease, and nobody likes that. I mean, we all kind of deal with it in the wintertime, but it happens. And so just depending on what part of ESG goals you want to meet, you've got to be able to define that data and then work with a partner to help you get to that place. If you've got a really robust BMS system, it's really easy to pull data from, and you can say, hey, we're pulling in the maximum allotted outside air. We're trying to do it at night to save you energy. We're doing all these different things to kind of meet those goals. But again, everybody has a vast array of, do they have a BMS at all, or do they not? And how do I get there? It's really not an easy task. So find a partner that can help you with that.
It's great content. And I'd like to turn to Abby, just, thinking about Samantha's comments here. Are there any clients that stand out that, you've worked with that have come to you with some of these ESG goals? And, what are the ones that would really stand out? I mean, we talked about Fitwell, but is maybe something related to energy reduction? And then, what has been like some of the pathway or the partnerships that you utilize to, deliver on any of those requests?
So from an ESG goals in some of the companies I've worked for in the past, the real estate portfolio has been mixed, but depending upon the industry, it's pretty heavily leased. And unless you're, a single occupier, triple net lease, and you control everything, you're at the mercy of whatever prorated data that you get based upon your square footage. And sometimes when you go through and you're doing the reporting for like your annual report, anything that you look at to say, let me, translate this into metric tons, let me go try to find and estimate energy costs because the building can't give it to you. You're looking at just a general database based upon either the street address or the submarket in that country to pull the data. And it's so very generalized. So that's going to what Samantha said, it's data. And even just the basic data that you can give a tenant is very helpful. Now, not all tenants are going to be really interested in getting that kind of data. I think more now so than there were even 5 years ago. There are more and more tenants because it is something that the talent that they're trying to recruit and retain is really interested in. They want to understand that you're not being, they want to know your carbon footprint. They want to understand that you do care about it. They are smart and they know that that there are limitations to what you can do and what you can influence. But just the fact that you know what it is pretty major. So being able to not have to go to a database and estimate it, actually getting it is helpful. And that again goes to Samantha's, just the data.
I'd say that's the underlying theme of this topic of discussion: getting access to data, getting from a disparate types of mechanical systems and buildings, whether it's commercial use or retail use or whatever the portfolio demands. That's the first milestone to cross in order to accomplish some of these ESG goals.
Yeah. And cost-effective data. Yeah,
naturally cost effective. Yep. Okay, well, we will move on in this discussion. We'll propose a new topic, the energy engineer's dilemma. So balancing indoor air quality and energy goals to minimize transmission of infectious aerosols. And I'll lead this discussion. So to paint a picture, say a university receives pressure to increase outdoor air rates post-COVID, while simultaneously being tasked with cutting energy costs to meet carbon reduction mandates. The building automation team is told to just figure it out. So, in this case, we really like to examine what best practices exist for balancing indoor air quality, comfort, and energy efficiency using real-time airflow data. And not to make this too much of a commercial for KMC, but I'd say that there's a couple of unique pieces of intellectual property that we can lend to the conversation. But before we talk about applying any type of digital control systems or implementing any kind of dashboard, I think the critical first step is to examine what you have in the facility. You could perform an audit, at least of the mechanical system, to identify what equipment you have, whether we're talking about constant volume or variable volume systems, whether we're looking at direct expansion unit for cooling, or if we have centralized cooling and hot water. And then, from there, we can begin to layer in, are we looking at, or are we working with a system that is controlled pneumatically, or is there digital controls? Is there some hybrid? Is it based on, some specific zones? And then finally building our way up to, what's the real deliverable? Or is it just for monitoring, or is it more for performance control and validation? And then, based on whatever the specific mixture of variables is, tailoring that approach to address any of the specific goals that, facilities engineering team or an auditor, in the case that there might be some sort of an oversight committee and regulations that would apply, tailoring that response to address each of those specific care abouts. And, at least in the case of KMC and, our experience with airflow measurement, we find that, I think both of you have said a lot of these systems, 60, we're talking about buildings that are 60 years old and over, and have, in many cases not been particularly well maintained, or have had to add, specific aspects to their footprint based on client demand that didn't necessarily have energy efficiency and performance and indoor air quality in mind when it was deployed. So, being able to utilize specific technology that is applicable to a wider variety of equipment and systems has, a twofold benefit. Number one, reduces the amount of time spent with engineering, and then, the associated support costs that you need to configure those items. But also, number two, creates something that is more universally compatible with that type of equipment, meaning that, you don't have devices that are measuring outdoor air in, just inside of a bird screen that's exposed to all types of ambient contamination that would prove a maintenance and performance nightmare somewhere in the next, 6 to 8 months. And that's where products like KMC's airflow measurement system come into play. It just suits a wide variety of equipment. It can be applied for both digital and pneumatic systems. Slightly shameless plug, but I'd like to open up the discussion to either Abby or Samantha. If one of you want to raise your hands and chime in with any additional thoughts that you have, or maybe some experience that you can share along these lines, that'd be great.
I'll let wisdom go last. So wisdom can go last with Samantha. But the first thing I would do, which is, it time and a little money, but it doesn't mean going out and getting like a capital investment, is understand the volumes you've got and the fluid flow through those volumes. So where is it coming from? Where is it going to? How many times does the air change in there? You'd be surprised on where all the air is coming from, because you'll find out that you've got VAVs that you didn't know you had, and you've got vents that are dead and dormant that still have ducting to them. So understand that fluid mechanics, if I go back umpteen years to when I took that class, it's the fluid flow through your volumes. And that in anything, even if it's a large manufacturing area, understand that. And there's some moderately priced modeling softwares out there that you can see how your fluid is flowing, and if it's, at what rates and where you're getting currents. Understanding that's a good basis, because that's what you're starting with in order to then improve. And that's where I turn it over to Samantha, because she can tell you how to improve. But I've done that several times in a large manufacturing area. I even did it in a warehouse because that should be obvious. Not so much, but in office buildings especially, how that fluid is flowing.
Yeah, so I guess the non-technical term that we use on the HVAC side is just air balancing, right? How is your air flowing through your building? I love it, Abby. I do. I love it. But
Dusted off that engineering degree for a little bit.
No, I think it's wonderful. But when it comes to top off that, air balancing is definitely very, very important, because you can't expect all areas of your building to maintain the same performance for airflow and movement, right? When offices change, or you've gone through 5 TIs, or just in general, things change in the building. So making sure you've got the right airflow and the balance throughout that is super, super important. But another thing in this like indoor air quality world is that it always seems to swing either one way or the other. So like you do this evaluation and you realize you're like, wow, I've got way too much outside air for the amount of people I've got in this space. Or it's, whew, I'm bringing in way too much outside air and I can't control my humidity because I can no longer cool the building effectively. And so, in those COVID era times, we seen people make really bad, poor decisions about how to manage their building, because we had this panic moment, and we're like, I need so many air turns per hour. We're going to open up our economizers. We don't care if it's 100 degrees outside, and we're just going to bring as much outside air in as we can, not understanding that makes your humidity climb, because the building's not designed to be able to cool that kind of space. Vice versa in the winter. It's not like you can just open up the economizers and bring in 32-degree air. Right? It doesn't work that way. So we've seen people make some really bad and poor decisions based on that, but we also seen some buildings who maybe had maybe they were newer, or maybe they had just stayed on top of their mechanical systems, realized like, hey, we've already been getting these recommended number of air turns. And at that point, it's great, because as a building owner, you can say, hey, we meet these guidelines, we've met them for years, and we're good to go, right? And then if your tenants have even more concerns, because we all heard MERV 13 filters, HEPA filters, right? Mm-hmm. We ran all that gambit, and that's important, and it's in well-placed areas with well-placed scenarios, right? Because again, you have pressure drops when you start talking about putting in MERV 13 filters and HEPA filters. And sometimes legacy systems, actually a lot of times, they can't handle that, right? And so you don't want to sacrifice building and mechanical performance for increasing outdoor air, but you also, as a building engineer, have to be aware of that energy usage, because when we're pumping in more outside air, we have to condition that space, and that costs money, right? And so finding that balance is, it's incredibly complex. It's incredibly difficult to be able to do. And if, again, you go back to having some data to look back at, to be able to monitor and measure performance, I think is important. But also, just understanding that different parts of your building are going to perform a little bit differently. And so you may need to address those first.
Here's something I want to spin off what you said too. So I totally understand it. Now, you in the audience, you've got to go back and you've got tenants or just your employee occupants. Telling them we're within standards, they don't understand it. Now, here's something that my parents told me ages ago. Their perception is your reality. So your reality is that they're going to still think there's something wrong, even though it's not technically. So the biggest thing, the best thing that I ever did was help to explain it to them very simply, and not all of our technical jargon, but help them understand what's going on, and not the why, but the what. And explain it on their terms to help them understand. So if they're uncomfortable, yeah, let me know. But it might be okay, and the building is just balancing itself out. So I think it's a great way to keep communication with your tenants or the occupants of the building. So you got that good communication flow in there, like, okay, you've heard me and you are addressing it, and I understand what's going on.
I'd like to stay on this topic for just a second, because now with all this data and with this communication feedback loop established, thinking about some of the financial impacts of just optimized performance and delivering the code minimum amounts of outside air, whether we're talking about it in the heating or the cooling seasons. What type of funding mechanisms have you all seen out there that might be available to either property owners or potentially occupants by implementing some sort of an upgrade to their facilities to specifically target improved ventilation? Can we come to
Abby? That sounds right up your alley.
Abby first.
Ooh, so I don't think we said, but I live here in Texas, and in Texas, we have a great program that I know is nationwide, but it's called Texas PACE, and it helps building owners connect them with approved funding as well as approved and certified engineers to help them go through and assess, yes, here is this upgrade that you want to do, whether it's water, whether it's HVAC, whether it's just new windows, lighting, and validates your savings by doing some sort of retrofit or upgrade. And then it connects you with those approved financial institutions to give you an incredibly low rate loan to do those capital investments. Now, I've known of several development firms here in Dallas that have done that, and been able to save some very old buildings by just doing that retrofit and getting that help with the capital funding. And that is if your company doesn't want to invest, $20 million to update your chillers.
Yeah, naturally.
Yeah, funding is a scarce resource, right? Like that's a challenge for all building owners. And PACE is a great one. It stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. So if you're in a certain state, you can search for that. I will say some states are better than ever. I'm really jealous of Texas's PACE program because mine are not as great.
Yeah. It's run there are several, and this one is a .org that the state supports. So I agree, fantastic.
Abby, there was a question in the chat. Do you know if there's a percentage, like a max contribution for your for PACE Texas?
Meaning from the owner's side?
I would say at both.
I think there is a minimum project dollar value, but any of the building upgrades that any of us would think of doing, like even retrofit LED lighting, you hit it easily. Yeah, it's a few $100,000.
The only other ESCOs, energy service companies, are a bit, I take them with a grain of salt because I don't like people coming in and saying, hey, I'm gonna save you all this money and then we're gonna split the cost, or I'm gonna keep a percentage of it. I'm not a huge fan of that. The model wouldn't work though if it wasn't effective in some instances. So finding I guess a true like value added ESCO would be beneficial. And then some of our states are starting to put together these community groups where you can have like funding resources are allocated into a building exchange, right? And this is through I'm trying to think, it's maybe through well buildings or might be the Department of Energy, but they're starting to put together these coalitions that help connect funding for people that want to do energy savings projects. And it's going to be vast and it's going to vary across state to state, but sometimes you can look for those exchanges if you have a state that supports it and has put together those resources.
Yeah. Always vet, though, the partner that you enter into, just like Samantha said about the ESCOs, always vet them and have a little background check to make sure that they're legitimate.
I would agree. You can also, like, shameless plug, like, you can get a hold of your mechanical contractor and they can do a lot of things to help with that as well.
Right.
So.
And Texas PACE lets that happen too, is they get those mechanical contractors that I'm sure DMG is part of to come in and do that assessment.
Yep.
And the one of the other revenue stream I was going to point out, or I'd say funding streams, not revenue, is, you know, some utility providers have a monitoring-based commissioning program that you know, property owners can enroll in, and then they have prescriptive rebates that are assigned to energy-related enhancements, and you know, some of them tie very closely the energy conservation measures to delivering code minimum amount of outside air. One other question that came into the chat here was, let's you know, model Class A 5-story office building located in perhaps Chicago with 300,000 square feet. What would the estimated ROI after a 1 year post installation of an optimized airflow measurement approach and associated IAQ monitoring system be? You know, in the case of Chicago, where they have ComEd as the local utility provider, they have a very robust monitoring-based commissioning program, and if it does require some certain barriers of entry, like you have to have a certain amount of total, you know, wattage that's consumed on an annual basis. But if your building qualifies for enrollment, then they can fund, you know, not only the energy assessment, but also provide funding that could be, you know, attributed for the deployment of a solution. And then on the back end of things, they will also help fund the measurement verification, M&V. And, you know, I've seen the ROI for it depends on the type of facility, but if we're talking about, like, you know, a facility that has, say, 13 air handlers, and they're all being optimized from an airflow measurement and IAQ perspective, definitely within 1 year of installation, we've seen that return on investment available. And, you know, depending upon how poorly the system was operating, if we're talking about something with, you know, we go back to the idea of leaking dampers or cracks that are in the interstitial cavities around the brick, you know, just, you know, replacing, upgrading those dampers, and then verifying how, you know, the actual code minimum amounts of outside air has led to, you know, ROI in as little as 8 months. Wow. But so we've got 3 minutes left.
You did that without opening up Excel.
Well, I might have been part of the project, one or two of them. Yeah. Yep. But I'd say I've seen monitoring-based commissioning programs that are available through a couple of different utility providers. Consumers in Michigan stands out. I know that, you know, out in New York and New Jersey, the utility provider has some incentives available, and then the Pacific Northwest, I've seen some monitoring-based rebate programs available as well. So I guess coming back to Samantha's comment is just, you know, lean on your mechanical. They've got a good idea of what's available and what paper trail to follow in order to qualify for those rebates.
Yeah, my only comment on the ROI question, because of people ask me that a lot, and it's my least favorite question to answer, because, like, what is your baseline of your ROI? What are you really trying to get out of it? Are you, because you can't calculate the cost of a capital, like, investment into building structure, right? Like, it's not, we all got kind of, I don't know, spoiled by the whole lighting retrofits and ROIs, because like we got paid to install light bulbs, right? And so people come to me and they're like, hey, what's my ROI on replacing this chiller? And I'm like, well, it's not going to be 3 years. right?
Mhm.
But also you have to provide cooling for your building. So having somebody that is well versed in all methods and all ways to get you that data, and then also to understand that there is not any big capital investment into your building that's really going to have an ROI like lighting, right? Because nothing is cheap. And if you're talking about elevators, mechanical, roofing, or facade, like you've got huge costs wrapped up in that. And there's not, I mean, ROI is not really it's hard. People have that concept. It's hard to actually meet those
Mhm.
standards, right? And then if you're not collecting the data, you have no standards to compare to. So how do you
Yep.
know?
Yeah, you could take it to another level and look at it from the building investor perspective, saying
Right.
this building, has a market value of 320 million.
Mhm.
It has it because it has that now, and it's all operating. If I keep it operational, then that building will appreciate. But if I don't keep it operational, that building value starts to depreciate. And my $320 million building could be in 5 years, 300 million.
Mhm. It also affects your long-term leasing ability, right? So anyway,
Which
be
circles back to the
educated,
first question
right?
of,
Yep. Yep.
Be
Excellent symmetry.
educated in how you calculate the ROI, because if somebody comes to you on for HVAC and says, "Oh, it'll pay off in less than a year," they're lying.
yeah,
Yeah.
It takes a whole lot more than just that one calculation, right? It can,
Mhm.
and I've seen projects where they do, but vet them just a little bit more.
yeah.
Yep. Well, I think this naturally concludes our discussion for the afternoon. I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. I want to thank Abby and Samantha, our experts, for contributing, sharing your experience, and all of the insights that you have on how indoor air quality and active measurement and of ventilation rates can have an outsized impact on tenant retention and indoor air quality goals. So with that, we'll end the webinar. I'll let you all sign off, and we'll point out that in post, once we share all this information on social media, Samantha and Abby's contact information will be available for everybody to reach out.
Thank you.
So
All right. Thank you. Great fun.
have,
Bye-bye.
have a great afternoon, everyone. All right, take care.